Genesis 25:19 through 28. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And so I'm going to stop right there to cover a little bit. Barrenness was often, we see how that happens with godly women, and with Hannah, and with Sarah, with Elizabeth, how they're barren and then they go to the Lord. Oftentimes, He's the last person we turn to in our problems, but He should always be the one we turn to. Oftentimes, we should make more effort to make Him the first one we turn to, because He's the one that can take care of it when no one else can. The children struggled within her. Let's see. So she went, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Now this is uncommon due to birthrights. The older would have been, oldest male was the heir. So the oldest male was given the birthright. He was given power. He was more esteemed than the younger in most things. We see in the Bible, we see how God doesn't work in the way that man recognizes. Being the heir doesn't mean as highly regard to God. He chooses who He chooses. So we see here how He's already, before they're even given names, He's already chosen that Jacob was going to be blessed. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Esau, which means hairy. Afterwards his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was Jacob, which means heel. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now this is key to their upbringing. Both of them are favorites of their parents, so they have a closer connection to one. This is also key to the blessing, because perhaps even if Esau wouldn't have been the heir, the oldest, because he was favored by Isaac, Isaac would have probably given him some type of blessing anyway. So we see how there's favoritism there, and how God has already chosen who He's going to pick. But Isaac ain't really listening to the will of God here. He's picking who he chooses. And oftentimes we go about that way, and we can allow this to affect how we develop. We'll allow these circumstances in our life to affect how we follow God. And we see that here in this next part with Jacob, how he allowed this to affect his choices. And so he was more determined to make things happen on his own rather than trust in the Lord to make them happen. So we're going to pick back up in verse 29, which is the next verse, and go through go through 34. So once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he is famished. This would have been the typical scene here. Jacob would have stayed home helping his mom. This is one reason why he is favored by her. And Esau would have been out in the fields, which is why he is favored by Isaac. We see how for him to come back and not have any food, he probably wasn't able to hunt something down that day. So he's been searching, hunting, and not able to get anything. So he's exhausted. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Therefore he was called Edom. And Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." So Jacob's using his basic needs, to cover up what he truly wants. Rather than trusting in God, we see how he's being deceitful, how he's conniving. And we can choose to do this. We can choose to make things happen our own way. But we see later in Jacob's life, because he chose to do things his own way, things were worse off for him. And the thing is, he still had to wait on God. He broke down the doors, but he still had to wait on God to have the blessings come to the other side of it. And oftentimes that's the way it works with us. We can break down doors, but that doesn't mean the blessings are going to be there until God wants us to be in the blessings. Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is the birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear it to me first." So he swore to him and sold him his birthright. Now it's important to note that swearing, giving your word, meant more. People didn't break their word back then. People kept their commitments. So for him to bind his word to Jacob meant that Jacob had his birthright, which at this point just meant he would be the heir. He sold him, gave him the heir. Now we also see later how Jacob don't even get his possessions from his dad for the most part. He gets them from Laban. He ends up having to work for what he has rather than just inheriting it. So him gaining this birthright isn't really valid. The fact is, he just ruins his character. He becomes a deceiver rather than earning anything, rather than gaining anything. Because there is no mention of him gaining any of Isaac's possessions. The possessions in the fields and all this stuff he gained was from Laban. And the only blessing that mattered, we see later, is when God came to him and blessed Jacob himself. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So he starts hating his birthright due to this. He hates the inheritance. His hate starts simply with his birthright. We see later we'll cover this today, how he starts having a hatred for Jacob, which is because of Jacob breaking down the door. And when we break down doors, instead of allowing God to open them, people are going to get affected. People are going to get mad at us. It ain't saying that when we go through a door God's opened, people are going to be mad at us. But if we break down one and get people mad at us, we got to make things right. And Jacob, God led him and gave him opportunity later to make things right with Esau. But if we just walk through the door God already opened for us, we don't got to set things right. Because if we're following him through that door and people get mad at us, it's because we're following him. We don't got nothing to make right. People are going to get mad at us when we're following the Lord. But if people get mad at us because we're using deception and all this other stuff as Jacob did here, we need to make things right. We have a reason to. Okay, we're going to pick it back up in chapter 27 and the first of it. And I think we're going to be covering this entire chapter here. Okay. Okay. One day when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called Esau, his older son, and said, "My son, yes, father." Esau replied, "I am an old man." And now Isaac said, "And I don't know when I may die." Okay, Isaac, first of all, lived another 20 years after this. Because we see how Jacob had his trip with Laban and worked all them years. And the reason Jacob came back is because Isaac died. So we see that whole time he was over with Laban working for him, Isaac was still alive at this time. So Isaac's kind of jumping the gun here, giving this blessing. Also, the fact that he brought Esau after God's promise to have the younger one shows that he's neglecting God's word. So we see how oftentimes people neglecting what God has for us, we can allow that negatively influence us to where we break down doors. But we're not to do that, because God's got a handle on it. And God would later give His blessing to Jacob, which meant a lot more in the long term than Isaac's blessing that Jacob took. Take your bow and a quiver full of arrows, and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn, before I die. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I have overheard your father say to Esau, 'Bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.'" So we also see here his son, her son. They were both brothers. They were both of their children. But we see how the favoritism shown there. We see how he's allowing his mother to manipulate him into doing what she wants of him. And as Christians, we're not to allow this manipulation to happen in our lives. We're to follow and do what the Lord wants for us. And while people may try to have us do what they want, we're to keep seeking after the Lord. "Now, my son, listen to me. Do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine young goats, and I will use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies." "But look," Jacob replied to Rebekah, "my brother Esau is a hairy man, and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I'm trying to trick him, and then he'll curse me instead of blessing me." So Jacob knew, okay, this plan ain't fully thought out. He ain't neglecting it as he should have. He should have been like, "No, I'm not going to do that." If Isaac wants to give him the blessing, Jacob should have just stayed out of it. But instead, he's looking for excuse instead of saying no. Oftentimes, this is how the devil works. We just give him an excuse why not to, and then somehow he works around that excuse instead of us just saying no from the beginning. We just make an excuse instead. Reasoning. This is what happened in the garden with Eve. She was reasoning rather than saying, "No, I'm not going to eat that fruit." She's saying, "Well, we're not supposed to. He said that, God said this," rather than just saying, cutting the devil off right there. And this is what we need to do. We need to just cut it off right there instead of reasoning, because the devil's a trickster. But his mother replied, "Then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goats for me." So Jacob went out and got the young goats, for his mother. Rebekah took them and prepared a delicious meal just the way Isaac liked it. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were there in the house, and gave them to her young son. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. Then she gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. So Jacob took the food to his father. "My father," he said. "Yes, my son," Isaac answered. "Who are you, Esau or Jacob?" So Isaac's hearing obviously hasn't slipped, so he's noticing the difference in voice between Isaac and Jacob. Jacob replied, "It is Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat so you can give me your blessing." Isaac asked, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God put it in my path," Jacob replied. So he's referring to God as Isaac's God. We see how this later plays out because Jacob hasn't decided to follow God yet. We see how he commits to him later after a battle at night, and he gets a blessing and then chooses to follow God. But at this point, Jacob's just living his life for Jacob. And this is the way we are before we come to Christ. We live our life for ourselves or something other than God. And we come to a point where before we accept Him, where we know who God is beforehand. But sometimes that commitment we make to Him isn't after we know who He is. Oftentimes for most people, it's a period after where we're like, okay, this is who God is. I know who He is. I need to start living for Him. And that's oftentimes how it works with people. And that's how it would work out for Jacob. He knew who God was, and he knew how powerful He was. It just took him time before he submitted to Him and started serving Him. So Jacob went. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you really are Esau." So Jacob went closer to his father, and Isaac touched him. "The voice of Jacob, but the hands are Esau's," Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob, because Jacob's hands felt hairy, just like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. "But are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Jacob replied. Then Isaac said to him, "Now, my son, bring me the wild game. Let me eat, and then I will give you my blessing." So Jacob took the food to his father, and Isaac ate it. He also drank the wine that Jacob served him. We as Christians should never use deception to get what we feel the Lord has for us. If it's what the Lord has for us, we don't have to use conniving and all these scheming methods to get there. He's just going to make it happen. He's going to allow it to happen. Sometimes the Lord will use those of the world to get accomplished what He has for us. But He never plans for us to act as those of the world to get it done. We're never to use sin to get things, because He'll provide another method. He will have a method that's better than using these tactics. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come a little closer and kiss me, my son." Jacob went over and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced, and he blessed his son. He said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell outdoors which the Lord has blessed. From the dew of heaven and the richness of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvest of grain and bountiful new wine. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. All who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed." So this is his blessing to him. Jacob used all this conniving to get a man's blessing. It isn't until later that God gives him a blessing. God makes a covenant with Jacob, which is a lot more important than his covenant and his blessing given to him by his father. Because we see how his father's blessing would have went away when Jacob died. Because there is no... we see how his blessings individualized. It ain't talking about his children. It's talking about Jacob. But God's blessing goes beyond Jacob to his children. So what God had in store for Jacob was much higher than what Jacob was trying to get. And oftentimes this is why we need to be patient and wait on God. Because what we want is one thing, but what God is going to give us is going to be far above than what we expect. Okay. Now it happened as soon as Isaac was finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau came in from his hunting. He also had made savory food and brought it to his father, and said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me." And his father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" So he said, "I am your son, your firstborn Esau." Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, Where is the one who hunted the game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed." When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me also, my father." And he said, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing." You know, the world's going to use these tactics. And we got to prepare for the world to use these tactics. We got to be cautious and realize that they're going to use these tactics. But regardless of them using these tactics, we're to keep following after God and allow Him to handle what they're doing. We're going to pick back up in verse 41. After that, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing from Isaac. He thought to himself, "My father will soon die, and I will be sad for him. Then I will kill Jacob." So he's saying, okay, there'll be a period of mourning. I ain't going to do this while our father's alive. But he's planning on killing Jacob. We also see how God uses his time away to loosen up Esau's heart a little bit, to where when he finally comes back after his father's actually dying, that Esau doesn't kill him. Rebekah heard about Esau's plan to kill Jacob. So she sent for Jacob and said to him, "Listen, your brother Esau is comforting himself by planning to kill you. So my son, do what I say. My brother Laban is living in Haran. Go to him at once. Stay with him for a while until your brother is not so angry. In time your brother will not be angry, and he will forget what you did to him. Then I will send a servant to bring you back. I don't want to lose both of my sons on the same day." Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am tired of Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of these Hittite women, here is the land I want to." So she sends him to Laban. We learn through the next passages of Scripture that Jacob, because of all this, never sees his mom again, because he comes back on his father as his father's dying and his mom's already been dead. So we see how following our own path can lead us away from those that we're close to. It can lead us not only away from God, but those we consider close. It put a divide between him and his brother. It caused him to where he didn't see his mother again. So these are the results of when we try to choose our own way rather than allowing God to lead us.